Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us on today's live webinar. We have a very exciting topic for you all today on how to make sure that you are running a cyber savvy business in the age of AI. So, a very relevant topic right now because Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And of course, we have our guest speaker here that I'm thrilled to introduce you to all. So, Dawn is here. So, we'll get started in just a moment here. We're letting everyone trickle on in. But thanks everyone for joining. Today's topic, as you know, is cyber savvy business in the age of AI. So hello everyone, I'm Naomi Kaduwela, head of Kavi Labs at Kavi Global, your favorite data analytics and AI firm here in Chicago. And today we're so excited to be joined by a good friend of mine and an amazing thought leader in the space of cybersecurity. So today I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to Dawn, and here I'm going to let Dawn introduce herself. So Dawn, why don't you take a few minutes here and let everyone know a bit about your background and especially maybe touching on your book, 33 Ways Not to Screw Up Cybersecurity. So she is amazingly accomplished and so kind to share her knowledge with all of us through her writing as well as today on today's session. So Dawn, take it away. Let's learn a little bit more about your background and how you got into cybersecurity.
Okay. Hey, Naomi, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. For those that I've met and those that I haven't met, welcome and happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. My background has really been a journey in emerging risk from early in my career till now. Emerging risk often from emerging technology. And I've just been wired to be risk averse pretty much my entire professional life. And so I hear of a new technology and immediately I think, oh, but what about this? And what about this? So I've always got that wiring, which is the voice, I guess you could say the voice of reason or unreason. But as a new lawyer, I went into environmental early on. I took a course in law school in environmental and loved it. And I got into insurance at Cigna in Philly because they had an environmental pollution unit. And that was my first entry into insurance and risk and also litigation over wordings. So from there, I basically had 12 years abroad working in both law, insurance, and reinsurance. And same thing, at that time, there was a lot of product recall and professional liability. But this was all really before cyber kicked in. And then in about 2012, I was working for Aon here in Chicago, and I had the blessing really of working on a complex claims portfolio, medical malpractice and legal malpractice. But I also had the opportunity to do cyber as a subject matter. And so really for 8 years there, I learned it, I spoke about it, I wrote about it, and I was completely hooked on yet a new emerging area of risk that we had to deal with. Now, fast forward to November 2022, and we remember that was the really release of ChatGPT. And so that really brought me into a new bookend in my career, which is now looking at the niche areas of AI and cyber and how they're connected, and keeping in mind how we all need to manage both the benefits and risks of these exciting new tools. My book was written during the pandemic, and I had some time on my hands, like a lot of us did, working from home. And I thought, with remote work, I was hearing so much about the lack of cyber awareness, and suddenly people are thrown into home environments. And so I decided to write this book, really consumer facing, for knowing about the human factor, not towards the high technical cyber experts, but towards, everyday people working from home and figuring out, well, what are the tips I need to know to be cyber secure and cyber savvy? And so I guess you would say my mission is really to help business leaders and teams effectively address cyber threats And now adding into that equation, AI risks.
Fantastic intro, Dawn. Thank you so much. And touching on a plethora of other exciting topics that we'll dive into more. So, love the AI plug. Of course, we're going to go there because it's exciting how cyber is changing and emerging with the emergence of AI. But thank you for sharing your story. Really exciting to see how kind of the pandemic got you into writing your book. And I really like your call out on the interlink with the revenue cycle management. So we do a lot of that as well. So really
Mhm.
interesting to hear you've been working on that from the other side, from the legal side. So love that. We'll probably chat more about that later.
Okay.
So, without further ado, let me dive into today's prepared Q&A here with John. And as we go through, feel free, everyone, to put your questions in the chat. We will get to them as we go through, or perhaps at the end, depending on how the flow is going. So let's dive in. You've already started to set the landscape, Dawn, with some of your comments about kind of the current state of cybersecurity, but just to level set, set the benchmark for those who may not be as deep in this area. Tell us a little bit more, kind of level set, what's the current state of cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity is an investment, and it's really a vital one. To put it in everyday terms, the bad guys are using AI for evil, and the good guys are using AI for good. So you need to be cyber savvy. And cyber savvy really means assume that you're going to be attacked. Go from that point. The days of really saying, and I'm sure some of you may have heard this before, of saying it won't happen to me, are gone. You do not want to do the opposite of being cyber savvy, which is really psychological resistance to your well-being, your safety, and security. We may have gotten away with that for a while, and people have for the past 20 and so years and never been attacked. But now you up the game and you raise it up a level because of AI and the threats from that. So that's where we stand now. With cyber savvy also means, in a way, AI savvy.
Thank you, Don. Love that comment about how AI is being used by the good guys, but also, unfortunately, by the bad guys. So, lots to touch on there about applications and ethics. But to stay on track, let's talk more about what it means to be having some of these essential skills and practices for organizations to really be cyber savvy in a digital environment, right? You already assumed the mindset shift, you are going to be attacked. So now that we know that, what do we do about it?
Well, there's really three things that I want to drive home today in this sort of limited time that we have, and that's training, diligence, and funding. And training means awareness. You cannot really stop a risk that you're not aware of. And the sense of risk only comes through training. And I look at the analogies of driving, dancing, sports, language. We do not learn from one lesson. We have to repeat. We learn through repetition. And
Mm.
so that's something to keep in mind if you are investing in cybersecurity awareness training, or if you haven't done it yet. Don't think a once a year video during lunchtime and people get a printable certificate is going to do it, which I remember having back in the day. And it's like, oh, I did this cybersecurity video. And then if the real thing comes, then somebody says, who do I call? What do I do? I don't remember the video. So it's this repetition. You don't say, oh, you had one driving lesson, so here's the keys, go for it. The second thing is really diligence, and that deals with behavior. So one person, and there's so many historical events of this, one person can really override your cybersecurity investment. So you may have spent millions of dollars on cybersecurity that one person overrides. It could be in remote work, hybrid work, in the office. So you have to also have diligence in behavior and change behavior. And then the third thing is funding. And maybe people don't think about this as much as they should, but I had a friend who lost her business after a ransomware attack because she couldn't pay the ransom, didn't have insurance, and simply couldn't get her data back or carry on. So you really have to think about funding the loss. Do you have self-funding? And if you don't, have you considered cyber insurance? And if you do have cyber insurance, is it adequate? Are you using a respected broker to help you? So training, diligence, and funding would be, sort of essential skills. And there's more, but those are the top three for today.
Thank you, Dawn. Let's hit it like a mantra: training, diligence, funding. Some great
Oh
takeaways.
my, yeah.
Love your comment about funding the losses, right? You need to be one step ahead, think ahead. It's sad to think that we really are at a point where this can lead to, debilitating a business. They're not able to recover. I know healthcare has been taking a hard hit with all the sensitive PII and PHI data and lots of attacks and holding the data for ransom. So just absolutely tragic. But let's continue on.
Sure.
Don, what are some practical and actionable steps? You started to touch on these things a little bit, but that organizations and individuals can do to really strengthen their cybersecurity posture and become more cyber savvy, as I love how you coined it.
So a couple of things. I think a fun story. So I remember going into a client's office and they had these TV screens, monitors on the walls. And I was waiting for my meeting and I said, what are those stats that you're showing? And they're like, well, we have a contest every month of who was able, if there was one, if there's someone who was able to actually discover a phishing email or prevent something from happening, an incident. And so whoever wins that month gets a gift card. And at first I thought, well, that's kind of bizarre, but actually it makes sense because, we came, years ago and even now this blame and shame culture where, oh my gosh, I received the phishing email. What did I do? I'm going to delete this and hide. And that's really the worst case scenario. You want to actually tell someone who needs to know that this came to you, and then they can do their internal process to track it down and stop it. So communication is key. So one of the things you can do is actually make it fun and encourage it and not ever make somebody feel less than because they were sent an email from FedEx or somebody. I remember receiving a FedEx email. This might have been 10 years ago, and this was in the office, and it said, all in small letters, Dawn Kristy, my full name. And it said something to the effect, you have a package, the way it was written, the English was way up. You have a package awaiting you. Please click in this big blue box. And so now we know that, we're more clued in on the big box in an email. Please don't click on it because it could be a phishing email. But the idea now too is, and we'll get to this in a bit, that the language and grammar is so improved now for the hackers. You're not going to see you have a package awaiting you. That's an improper sentence. So that's something to know. And then, besides the training and making it like a company-wide culture, you can't forget about cyber insurance. And I worked in cyber insurance for over a decade, and this psychology of resistance, it was always an issue. We have to overcome it, especially in the SMB or SME market. So cyber insurance is the funding, right? But it's much more than that. And I don't know if people realize that you get support for your incident response plan, your data breach response, ransomware negotiations, business interruption coverage, business email compromise support, and possibly recovery. And that's more than just claims that are brought against you from third parties. So it's an all-encompassing, complicated insurance, and it's really not standardized. So again, you always want to go to a reputable broker for help with that. But if you don't have that, then you go back to my friend who had no funding to pay the ransom or get her records back, so she closed her business. Now, had she had cyber insurance, she might have survived.
Thank you, Don. Again, another great quotable, moving away from the blame and shame game to driving the open communication. And yes, appreciate your practical advice. Everybody get that cyber insurance plan or think about your strategy.
I think there's
So,
one other thing you and I discussed before, and that is this hybrid work environment, right? So
yeah,
we kind of went from pandemic, everybody running home and working from home, and now there's been a trickling back to the office, and some are all office, some are all remote, and some are hybrid, which is a combination. And what struck me this month was this Gallup poll that came out about hybrid work, and it had nothing to do with cybersecurity, but it said like 58% of hybrid workers in the US receive no training whatsoever, not just cyber. And managers, 51% of those receive no training on how to manage a hybrid team. So my thought was, and I think I actually responded in a post to somebody, especially I said, this is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Who is teaching the hybrid teams to be more cyber secure? If they're not being trained on how to even function, let alone be cyber
right.
secure. And so there's things like shadow AI, and there's all these things they could be doing with devices that IT is unaware of. And so that was an eye opener for me that those percentages were so high on lack of training.
Yes, that is really quite staggering, Dawn, and a big gap that you're pointing out. I think just some oversight and probably catching up due to, the flux of immediate shift to remote work and everything catching up along with that. But good thing they have you now to come in and do different trainings. So let's continue right along. And discuss more about how the cybersecurity landscape is evolving with increasing use of AI, right? You had an interesting concept that you just touched on too, shadow AI. So you can maybe elaborate on that a little bit more here too.
Sure,
Yeah, let's talk about how these attacks are now unfortunately evolving with AI, but
sure.
as you said before, the good guys are also using it. So how we can also improve our defense.
It's an interesting time because AI tools, like generative AI tools, it's emerging tech, right? It's very reasonable. I think ChatGPT is $20 a month. What hacker is not going to spend that to improve their language in their phishing emails? I mean, it's like, a given. So it's not only that we're using and benefiting from the tools, meaning we, the good guys. However, you now add into the mix deep fakes, and there you have, the voice, the face, and what's going on with that. And this need to have perfect language, well, that's solved now. So that makes them more sophisticated and more convincing, and that's scary.
Mm.
So, we still have huge data breaches going on. Ransomware volume is off the charts. And what I'll get to in a moment is business email compromise is still the highest value losses, not volume, but value. And that's something that the FBI, they do an IC3 report every year. And VEC, as it's called, is always the highest value. And that is people being manipulated to send money. That is not an infiltration into your network. That is you talking to someone like this and saying, will you send me $25 million? Sure. So that's something that I think the skill set of the hacker is improving, and therefore our skill set has to improve. Getting into shadow AI, that's a little bit deep in the weeds, but it's this idea that the IT department, the term shadow is meaning that the IT department is not privy to what you're doing with AI tools in the work network, in the work system. So if they don't know what you're doing, how can they monitor, help, regulate? And there was the term shadow IT that came up years ago in cybersecurity, and it was the same thing. There were firms dealing with this issue long before the pandemic of bring your own device to the office, BYOD. And so you had this situation where people were logging in with their home device in the office network, and that was called shadow IT. And now akin to that is shadow AI. So meaning that your IT experts in the entity are not aware of what you're doing. And that's a risk.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dawn. Let's talk a little bit as well about how integrating AI can really impact an organization's cybersecurity capabilities. And maybe you can give some examples,
Mhm.
elaborate a little more what kind of AI is used. You touched on a few so far, but please
Sure.
continue, Dawn.
Well, first, AI combined with cybersecurity can be a winning combination. AI has so many pluses. So it's a question of finding the balance and finding the tools that work with your systems and what's best. So
Mhm.
we're at a time where you really have to sort of think these things through and your various strategies and how to make them work. So to help cybersecurity, you have LLMs and generative AI tools, and they look at things like, and they help you with like sort of tracking data footprints where you're studying a user's online behavior or perhaps the nature of the data in the business. You can also use it for pattern recognition. It's great at tracking patterns, and that may help you identify vulnerabilities and also simulating attack scenarios. So that's kind of one bucket. And then the other, when you look at traditional machine learning, um, the classic is spam filtering, and many businesses have had that for a long time, the spam filter that goes onto the email program to block unidentified or unwanted emails. I don't know if you noticed this, but even just I have a few different email accounts, and in my basic Gmail, I mean, it gets flagged all the time. Unrecognized email, could be spam, be careful. And so whatever system you have, you can get flags, including in work emails. And so that's an important device or practice. And then also this idea of intrusion detective. Can we detect intrusions? And that's also more of a traditional ML type solution. And then there's something NLP, natural language processing tools, and they kind of analyze language versus generating text, which is sort of the LLM thing. And so that's used for phishing campaigns or phishing email campaigns that are teaching the staff how to recognize and stop, and they can also track phishing emails. So those are some of the tools. There's many out there, but there's something that you can do to at least kick it off if you've done nothing so far.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn, for those lovely examples of LLMs and Gen AI and ML and NLP. So, very exciting use cases. Let's talk a little bit now about the examples of AI being used on the other side, on the cyber side, as we always say, the good guys and the bad guys. So let's dig a little into this. And I know with the LLMs, you had mentioned earlier too about the bad guys being able to use them. And I know the big players, Microsoft and other, are doing a lot to try to add those safeguards and prevent
Mhm.
a model from doing destructive things, but I think it's still in the works, and those things can still somewhat be hacked sometimes. So it's, I think, evolving and needs to continue to improve.
For sure. So, you have the classic social engineering phishing email campaign, which I've already addressed. But again, this new twist is sophisticated and therefore more convincing. But
Hmm.
the more sort of significant bucket is the deep fakes that we're experiencing, and that's either voice or face. So you've got AI voice generators and AI video generators. So this is not about like AI risk that's looking at bias or quality of data. This is AI tools used for cybercrime, full stop. So that's a different thing than looking at the ethics and the bias and things that come up in the coding and that of AI. This is where you actually have the cyber threat based on these tools. And it's important to be aware of. And the voice generators and the video generators, there are companies coming up with more and more tools to do that. And there's also companies, thank God, that are coming up with ways to detect that. So there's always the promoter of the technology, and then those that are trying to detect the issues. So you really always have the two markets, right? Those that are preventing and those that are reacting and trying to recover. So can we detect when these things are happening? And I have some stories coming up that are going to be kind of eye-opening if people haven't heard about these.
Yes, with deepfakes, this was also a big discussion when the convention was in town here in
Mhm.
Chicago. And I know there's a lot of impact and a lot of look for the technology coalition, a bunch of the different technology partners coming together to figure out what can we do, how can we make sure these things are labeled, that they're tagged, that there's watermarks or other things available to indicate, this has been generated. But I think once again,
Mhm.
not a catch-all systems. Even the AI that is detecting deepfakes, I think, is not quite perfect. So again, a lot of areas
True.
to
I
improve.
found a story because I'm always looking for stories and telling stories. And there was this one guy, I think it was an NPR post, where he said he created a deep fake video for the quote was something like for $8 in 8 minutes or something, So we got this tool and he was able to create this whole video very quickly. And that is daunting because on the one hand, it's fascinating. Oh, look, I created this video and I'm going to send it
Right.
to my family or whatever. But on the other side of the coin, your family may be receiving a fake video that can be very scary, like a kidnap or whatever.
Oh my God.
We hear those stories happening too. So it isn't always just finance, but it's also, familial threats and these things being used to actually say, somebody's being harmed, you need to react, we want money. And so it runs the full spectrum of, again, good guys versus bad guys.
Yes. Now, I would love to compare and contrast and really get into some of the examples and use cases here, but let's look at some of the most maybe impactful or devastating cyber threats. You had mentioned a variety, ransomware, data breaches,
Mhm.
business email compromises. So let's think about some of the breaches and, what can we learn from them?
Well, I have two stories to share, and maybe more if we have time at the end. But one is involves Finland, and the other Hong Kong. So let's go international, right? So the Finland scenario really involved what I call it's a three-part attack. So on the first part, you have data breach, then ransomware, then extortion. So this psychotherapy clinic in Finland was hacked by one sole hacker, and he stole sensitive patient data from this psychotherapy center, and he threatened to release it. And of course, in that now he moved from exfiltration to ransomware, and ransomware being, now I've got your information, I'm going to lock your systems and I want ransom. So that's different from the actual breach. And then the third thing that he did was he went directly to patients of the psychotherapy clinic and asked them for money. So it caused a huge amount of distress, and some of them actually committed suicide because he said, if you don't pay me, I'm going to release your records. And you can imagine what those records would have that you wouldn't be telling anybody else in your life. So
Mm.
it was one of these things that had like three parts, the stealing of the data, the extortion of the company, and then even moving to the actual victims to extort. He was caught and sentenced to 6 years in prison in Finland. But it's such an extreme example of the value of PHI,
Yeah.
and what people will get because it's all so money driven and so really psychologically damaging, especially in that case. And then the other one is just consider the unimaginable. So that's my tagline for today. So this happened in Hong Kong, and it was an employee of a British company who was in Hong Kong, and he was, summoned to a video conference, a live video conference. And so we attended the conference, and it ended up that everybody attending except him was fake. So
Oh,
the executives, the co-workers, say like you and I right now would be fake, and we're doing this show, right? So he was convinced to send $25 million, and he did, to these fake, because of these fake people on the video conference. And this was in real time. This was not recorded. And so this makes you think of like, wow, this is a new type of fraud on a huge scale. And this is the point about business email compromise, because the company said, well, our financial stability was fine and our business operations were not impacted, they're basically saying one employee was manipulated. So this is where funds transfer fraud is different from somebody going in and taking your data or somebody locking your data and seeking money. This is outright fooling you, duping you into sending money, usually to an account that's going to be closed once it's received and transferred. And you may or may not get it back, but I have more stories on how you can get it back. But that was, to me, when I heard it, I thought, this is really, consider the unimaginable, because that was the first I had heard of. And I actually am, keeping an eye out for more of these, because when you think now about like requiring a password to join a Zoom call, I would definitely use one after hearing this story. So that's how I would explain data breach, which is stealing data. And then there's all that goes with it, the data breach notification, consumers are impacted, all the rules that the company that suffers it has to go through. Then the ransomware is the locking of the data. And then you decide, are you going to pay the ransom or not to unlock your data? And then the third that we'll address today is this business email compromise, where someone is being manipulated to send money.
Mm.
If that's clear on the
Yes.
differences.
Thank you, Dawn. I think those examples are just absolutely devastating, especially the first one, attacking such a vulnerable population and extorting like that. It is just so tragic to hear. So I think that should be a really strong motivator as we go into our next question to really think about this seriously. How can organizations effectively prevent and mitigate these tasks?
Yes, so consider the unimaginable, training and planning, training and planning. So if your teams are not trained and not aware of this, you're vulnerable, full stop. And then you have to plan as if you are going to be attacked, and that's the cyber savvy. And we'll get into in a minute all of the steps that you can take to make sure that you prevent. And then if you don't prevent, see it as a timeline. So you've got this timeline to the center. This is all prevent, right? Now you have an attack. Now you've got reaction and recovery. So on the front end is cybersecurity. Failing that, it's cyber resilience, which we'll get into. So it's like a timeline.
Yes, I love that, Dawn. So beyond prevention, we have to think about cyber resilience. So let's dive into that more. What does it mean to be cyber resilient?
So again, and some of this is maybe repetition, but that's the point of this getting through. Even for myself, sometimes if I'm tired or not thinking, I even will get an email and think, oh, wait a minute, there's no way this is real. But it's so easy to just click on something. It's just human nature, curiosity. So the idea is, if you cannot prevent a loss, then you need to respond, right? If you don't plan a response, how will you recover? And if you don't fund a recovery, are you going to close your business doors? So that's the sort of mentality. I need to prevent. If I can't prevent, I need to respond. And then with that, am I going to recover enough? Do I have the funds to recover and survive as a business? And
Yeah.
as I said, you've got that timeline. So cyber resilience really is, it applies to the culture and to planning for an attack and funding for an attack.
And so, what should these organizations have in place to make sure they can recover and they can bounce back from a successful cyber attack? So, for the organizations that want to improve the cyber resilience security that we mentioned, what are some of the considerations that they have to think about when building a strong incident response plan?
So, incident response is important. And there's actually new AI technology that's helping with that, which I'll get to in a minute. And it's a question of whether that will eventually change the dynamic of incident response. But an incident response plan can be really quite detailed, and it should be. And there's a lot of great experts out there that just focus on building an incident response. And you have a team and team players and all of that. And some of that can be supported through cyber insurance. But if you don't have insurance, you need to have one anyway. And the point of it is, You don't wait until the day of an attack to say, oh, I need to figure out a plan. You need to have it in advance. So you've got this timeline. So you've got the pre-incident preparation, and then you've got the post-incident preparation of an incident response. So you conduct a risk assessment, you identify your key players and stakeholders, you define potential security incidents and how you would respond to those. You make sure you have insurance if you don't have it, or funding if you're going to do it self-funding. You should inventory your data, and you really need to use like cybersecurity incident and event monitoring tools that are out there to log what's happening. And so that's sort of the pre-incident side of it. And then the post-incident is after something has happened. And again, picture day one. If your systems are shut down, did you keep your plan separate out of your systems? Do you have the emails, the phone numbers, who you have to call? Because if it's all online and you can't get online, well, then how are you going to access it? So as basic as it sounds, you need to have that plan stored outside of your network. And you need to have the most important numbers, which is, team leader and team members of the plan, your broker, your cyber insurer, and your legal counsel. You need to be able to tell people, this has happened to us, it's live, it's happening now, what do I do? And keep in mind, there can be a false incident, meaning you think something's happening. Well, it's better to be sure and notify people and report than say, oh, it's probably nothing, we shouldn't worry about it. Nothing is too small, because something small can lead into a full-blown cyber incident. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Dawn, thank you so much. If you have any other points, you can elaborate on how they can ensure, they're prepared to respond and recover if they have a cyber attack.
Yeah, you really, and again, there's great experts out there and consultancies that do this, but you really need to test your plan. It's not enough to have the plan and print it out and have all your numbers, but you have to really run through a test, and you need to do that at least once a year. And then you need to correct the flaws that are found. It's like anything. You've planned a procedure of some sort, and then there's a glitch in the system, so you need to modify it. And keep in mind that wait on the advice of legal counsel before you ever communicate an incident on your website or to the world, because you want to maintain privileges and make sure there's jargon and language that are very self-identifying in what's going on. So you'll see things like, well, the root cause is under investigation, meaning a company doesn't want to say if it's data breach or ransomware or what have you. So get in touch with your legal counsel and team up with them. It's really crucial.
Thanks, Dawn. Perfect. Any final comments then? Maybe
Well,
on
I wanted to talk about this, the AI, the paradigm shift, which is,
that?
it's called AI powered IR, which is AI powered incident response. And again, I'm doing all sorts of research and writing this year, and I came across this and I thought, wow, this is amazing, because they're saying that with generative AI, and there are companies out there that are offering this, that you can be faster and more precise in your incident response. Wouldn't that be great? And so
Absolutely.
they're using the AI tools to help you strengthen your security posture. And it's just a question of whether that's really going to work and whether people really adopt that. And so you're going to go from kind of a laborious checklist and a manual process of IR, as it's called, to now relying on a tool that will help you do it. And so over time, that tool may become better, and it may get to the point where that's relied on, more regularly. And then you can't forget about data backups and having them what they call on-prem and off-prem. So data that you have stored on premises, but then data that you have off premises, normally in the cloud. And then this idea of money and funding, and insurance as an option or self-funding as an option. you want to protect the ROI of the investments you make in cyber and AI. So to do that, you really need to balance the benefits and risks. And that's just the era that we're in right now.
Yeah, in some using some of those tools, Dawn, I think we have some follow-up questions here. Is it accessible to all businesses? Can only large companies afford it, or are these tools, these AI-powered tools, AI-powered incident response, is it accessible for the small firms too? Do small firms also need this type of monitoring?
Yes, incident response. I go back to my friend, a solopreneur. She had no plan whatsoever. I wish she had talked to me about it. So every organization should have an incident response plan. I mean, you can get, even if you can't afford a highly skilled external team, your IT person or someone can do the research to put a plan together. This is available online. There's checklists, there's manuals. It's not really rocket science. You can find what you need to do this. The hard part is, are you really going to use the plan? And so it's not really size specific, but to say, I have this plan. Am I going to test it? And then am I really going to use it for what I think is a real thing? So I think that incentive to do it is more important. It is affordable. The information is out there. And these AI tools that are coming out, I would think some of these entrepreneurs that are creating these are going to be more than willing to work with people to get this running and tested and to get it out there. So I wouldn't hesitate to approach some of them and find out, what are they offering? What's happening today, you often see like the free plan, the upgraded plan, and then the elite plan, even with the GPTs, right? So there may be a free plan that you can start for 30 days and try it and then upgrade and what have you. So I wouldn't let the cost be a daunting factor, but really trying to find the companies that offer the services.
Perfect. Thanks, Dawn, for that clarification and suggestion.
Any other questions? Because I don't see them.
And let's dive into a few rapid fire questions now as we just are wrapping up on the last 15 minutes here. So let's go into a few of these, John, but let's talk about some actual cases and examples of AI influencing cyber risk. I know this risk was another key area of yours.
Yes, so there's more on the BEC, and I'm sticking with this because it's like the underrepresented cyber threat. And so it's really, I call it the one person left behind, and I have this in my book as well. And you think, well, what does that mean, one person left behind? So picture a company, let's say it's a company of 50 employees, and they do trainings every quarter, which is great, right? But there's one guy who missed the trainings for some whatever reason. And two things can happen. One is the long holiday weekend, and the other is the emergency. So I'll go through those quickly. So the long holiday weekend, especially in the US, the Friday of July 4th weekend, Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, those are all prime target dates. We're going to get to somebody, skeleton crew in the office. We're going to get this guy who's not ready, and we're going to ask him to send $3 million today because it's urgent. And it won't be discovered till Tuesday because all the banks are closed on Monday. So that's the one example. Now, that person has two options. One, they do it, and they may think, oh my God, I can't question the CEO. I'm just the deputy here. I've got to do this. But the other side of the coin is somebody may do a gut check and say, oh, this feels really weird. I'm waiting until Tuesday. There's no way I'm sending money to a new bank account.
Right.
And then the other scenario is the emergency. So again, one person is not trained. She's heading up accounting because the head of accounting got called out on a medical emergency. Same scenario, right? She now gets a note from the CEO, or let's even bump it up to an AI voice message, or even an AI video that says, hi, this is John, and I want you to send this money. And she thinks it's authentic and does not question and sends the money. So this idea of BEC, keep in mind, it's a high value type loss. And so there is an interesting victory story, which I'll share. And Interpol intervened on a Singaporean company that sent like $49 million in business email compromise. And so Interpol has this new tool. It's like a global stop payment system. And they were able to get all but like $2,000 back through this system. They recovered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they ended up catching like 7 of the cyber criminals and got the remaining 2,000. Now that is a total victory. To
Wow.
lose, I think it was like $41 million, and to get it all back,
Amazing.
that's incredible. And again, getting back into cyber insurance, some of the policies may offer business email compromise coverage and support for that. And some of them, the teams that get involved with that can be quite successful in recovering some of the funds. So that's another thing
Promising.
to look at. And I want to point out there about BEC and cherry picking in your coverage, because I remember when, again, looking more in the SMB market, where a company would say, well, I don't need BEC because I pay all the bills, right? But 6 months later, they hired an accountant and forgot about that. And you're still under that policy with no BEC coverage. And now that person gets duped into it. Or they cherry pick and say, I don't need business interruption coverage. And then their business is shut down due to ransomware, but they didn't select that coverage. So you need to be crystal clear on the possible scenarios, again, working with your broker on that. And, be careful what you decide to exclude, because right now, the cyber criminals are really more savvy than they've ever been. So keep that in mind if you are shopping for cyber insurance.
Perfect. And on another topic, but another critical terminology and word that I think it's important everybody understand here, I'd love to hear more about what is cyber hygiene.
That's funny. So cyber hygiene is not the same as cyber savvy. And cyber hygiene is really kind of the steps that you take to be hygienic, literally. So these are the things like password management, MFA, keeping your software up to date, patching, all of the things that you would do to hygiene, meaning that you're following best practices. As opposed to savvy, which is getting at the training, diligence, and funding. This is like the day-to-day practice that you do to have the hygiene to stay secure, if that makes sense.
Great call out. Thanks, Dawn. And now I'd love for all of those that, are probably convinced now that there's some area of opportunity that they might be able to improve in their cybersecurity framework, or maybe they just need to implement one right away and get started on it. So I know that you often start out with a cybersecurity assessment. So tell us a little bit about what goes into a cybersecurity assessment, and what can people expect?
Yeah, and this again is not, organization sized specific. This is like a systematic way of evaluating your potential vulnerabilities within your organization and infrastructure. So it's gathering information from your systems, your applications, your controls, and then analyzing to see where are the weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And it can last from anywhere for like a few days for a small business to a few months for a large business. And I don't know if you've heard of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Naomi, but that's a group. They come up with all different frameworks, and they have the cybersecurity framework, CSF, and they actually have methodology in their framework, and it's readily available on their site and online, and NIST. And they look at these terms like identity, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And it's kind of the same theme that we've been talking about. So you really want to assess where are your weak points. And if you don't do an assessment, how do you know where they are? And again, cyber insurers have been using a cyber risk assessment for quite some time, and some of them do like an initial scan, may not be fully in depth to see if you're insurable. And say they find 3 flaws in your setup, they may say, okay, we'll give you 6 months or a year to get your ducks in a row, and then we'll do another to see if you qualify. So if you are wanting to get cyber insurance, but you don't have a clean house, so to speak, you have to then clean your house to get the coverage. So that kind of goes hand in hand. And so, like so many things with insurance, sometimes insurance really drives that overcoming what I call the psychological resistance to safety and security. And
Mm.
it's like, you want coverage, you need to clean up. So that's kind of how that works.
Wow, amazing, Dawn. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We're almost at time, so I'll pause now and just see any other final questions or any other final thoughts or comments, Dawn, that you'd like to share with everyone, not that you haven't already imparted
I would like
tremendous
to
amount of
share,
wisdom.
there were 2 recent really large data breaches, and
Yes.
you really need to be clued up on what's going on in your finances, in your business, and even personally. We're talking millions of records have been stolen in September and October, and we're at a point where were they AI based? It doesn't matter. The point is your information is out there and in the dark web and available. So all those things, here's where you get back to cyber hygiene. And I'll close with this point and maybe kind of a fun story, because this can really be kind of a dark subject, but I love this story and I loved this woman. I was speaking to a group of seniors at FIU in Florida during the pandemic. And this woman said to me, should I change my 12345 6 password on all my accounts?
Oh my
And
God.
that's an extreme example. And I said, yes, please. Please change it immediately. We'll talk after. And as extreme as that seems, keep in mind that all these breaches have your information out there. So if you have an AOL or a Yahoo account, and Yahoo had almost every account breached years ago, if you're still using that 10-year-old password, please change it. You know, these are things, this is cyber hygiene. If you've got a password that's a few years old on your bank account, update it. You know, you never know, in one of these huge breaches, especially, your data is out there. So especially if it's dealing with your bank accounts and your money, make sure that your passwords are up to date. I received a ping to update my iPhone this week, and I thought, oh, okay. And I did it immediately because I said, you got to practice what you preach. So of course it takes like half an hour to update and turns the phone off and back on, but it was security updates. And the thing is, you've got the time to protect yourself. Do it.
Thank you,
Have to
Dawn.
do it.
Love it. Thank you again so much for your time today. I think we all learned so much and are definitely walking away from this webinar much more cyber savvy than we started. So thank you again for your time. Thanks to all of you who joined live, and for all your cybersecurity needs, feel free to reach out to us. You can always email me at contact@kaviglobal.com. You can find more about Dawn at thecyberdawn.com. So super exciting. Hope to connect with you all soon. And thanks again, Dawn, for gracing us with your presence on Cybersecurity Month and for imparting all this wisdom. So until next time,
My pleasure. Thank you.
thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everyone.